friends, welcome back to my channel, and if it is your first time seeing me, then my name is Lucifer. In this channel I share about the crime-related cases and movies that I find intriguing and horrifying from all around the world. For this video, I would like to give you a disclaimer. In this video I will share some gruesome details and it could get disturbing, so if these things make you uncomfortable, please skip this video. And we will meet in the next video. I advise you avoid eating anything during the video, or if you are eating then first finish eating and then continue, as this video talks about cannibalism and trust me, it will be quite unappetizing. So, let's start this video. Today's case is about a plane crash of Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571. It happened on October 13th of 1972. A flight carrying 42 passengers, with Old Christian Rugby team's 19 members and their families and friends with 5 crew members, crashed in the Andes Mountain between Argentina and Chile. This story is called Miracle of the Andes. The passenger did not have any idea that the worst was yet to begin. The movie named Alive is inspired by this event. The pilot of the flight announced the passenger about the turbulence that they will pass through. The team was excited about the match in Chile that they were going to play in. It was later found that the crash occurred as the co-pilot did an error. The plane started descending north to Santiago, but there are still many tall mountains. The pilot tried ascending almost vertically, but the engine crashed, and that's when it hit the side of a mountain. One of the survivor, Dr. Roberto Canessa, later wrote a book named I Had to Survive: How a Plane Crash in the Andes Inspired My Calling to Save Lives, in which he explains everything that happened during the crash and after the crash. He remembers being flung forward during the crash and bashing his head hard on the plane. After hitting his head, he thought he was taking his last breath and started praying to the Almighty, but he had no idea it was just the beginning of a nightmare. He remembers everyone praying to the Lord to have mercy on them and save them. Pilot of the plane was dead and the co-pilot was alive, and he asks them to shoot him as he did the mistake. They deny doing it, but later co-pilot loses his life because of his injuries. Roberto still remembers a passenger's head with oozing blood and his brain lobes somewhat exposed. The airplane was destroyed to pieces and they were stuck in the middle of nowhere. The passenger and the rugby team were in despair, surrounded by mountains and freezing snow. They first rescued the ones they could and started collecting foods that were in the plane. They were quite optimistic that a rescue team will arrive in a matter of few hours for them. Boy, they were so wrong. With faith and hope, they drew a cross with their suitcases to give the rescue team a clue that will be visible from the sky about their presence in the midst of the raging blizzard. They even carved SOS on the snow so that someone would see it from the sky. On the second day, they saw jet and smaller planes flying above them. They were so excited and relieved that they were finally going to be rescued, but it was not for them. Freezing snow, food supply running short, and injured passengers screaming in agony and pain to a point of losing consciousness, but they had faith. They kept on waiting for days and days, but there was no sign of rescue. Among the 45 passengers, 12 met the inevitable death on the point of crash, 5 were injured beyond the point of recovery and lost their life on the first night. Nando was in coma for 3 days and had no idea that his sister and mother were dead. Now, after almost half a month, with no trace of rescue team, the survivors' main concern was the shortage of food. The unreliable freezing temperature and sudden attacks of avalanche made their survival even more difficult. For them to survive, they removed the wool covers from the remnants of the crashed plane and made a blanket out of it. They even tore the aluminum sheet from the plane and used it to melt the snow. This would provide them some drinking water. They even used seat bottoms to make snowshoes that would allow them to walk in slippery snow. The plane's cockpit was completely destroyed, so they used fuselage to keep themselves warm and used suitcases as a shield for the open spaces of the fuselage. They even made sunglasses from plastics found on the pilot's cabin that protected their eyes from snow blindness, hammocks for broken limbs, and sleeping bags from insulation of kitchen. They used everything that was left on the ruins to ease their survival, but the main thing was again the food. They couldn't survive on ice only. They even urinated inside the rugby ball, because they knew that if they urinated outside, then their urine would freeze. Dr. Robert was a novice medical student, but he used all his skills and instincts to help the injured. He even stabilized the fractured bones. He was forced to move the corpses, as other passengers couldn't bring themselves to do it. They moved around few distance from the crash to find anything living that could serve them as the food, but there were just snow and no living being could stay at that altitude. They even tried eating leather from the bags of the plane, but it had more chemicals, so it would do more harm than any good. They even tore off the seat in a hope to find straw, but it only had inedible foam. They were starting to feel the symptoms of starvation. They all knew about the body of passengers that were preserved in snow near them. They all knew that it was the only option and necessary for their survival. Many passengers started asking God for help and to guide them through this, but they knew what they had to do to survive. Dr. Roberto, being a medical student, had knowledge about the human anatomy and the nutrients it contained, like protein, fats. For his own survival and his fellow passengers, he had to take decision. and was the first to cut the piece of corpses. In his book he wrote about the guilt, him questioning of his morals, when he had to eat his friend's corpse. It was a huge dilemma, but he knew that he won't survive, so for his survival he had to do it. Dr. Roberto started slicing the body, and started handing out the pieces of the corpse to the passengers. Everyone started nibbling the pieces, except one passenger named Cochin Sired. He couldn't bring himself to do it, and was having hard time digesting the concept of cannibalism. But soon he was struck by starvation, so he stopped resisting and started accepting his fate. Passengers started eating the corpses that were once the people they loved. It was unbelievably nerve-wracking. Among the 10 bodies, 3 of them were unfit for consuming. Those were the bodies of Fernando Parrado's mother and sister and Javier Menthal's nephew. The idea of eating someone else's body was rationalized by them, that if the case were to be reversed, they would happily donate their own body for the survival of the others. On their 17th day, they were struck by another disaster that completely shook them to their cores. A huge avalanche struck over the crash site and swept 8 people to their death, along with the corpses they were living off. The passengers now had to eat the people who were alive and breathing few hours ago. After discussing for a long time, Dr. Roberto and others did what they had to do to survive. They cut the pieces of new corpses and consumed them. The communication was not completely cut off, but was of one way only. They could listen to the update with the help of a transistor radio about the search program. But on October 23, 1972, they were shattered by the news. The authorities gave up their search for the crash survivors after their almost 100 failed attempts to find them. Then the survivors realized that they were their only hope and they have to save them themselves. Then 3 passengers, Dr. Roberto, Nando Parrado, and Antonio, who were well-built, started looking for rescue around them. On the day 61, there were only 16 survivors that remained alive. All of them were malnourished and many were sick. Before they left, a passenger named Carlino Pease gave them a sleeping bag that he had made with the copper wire from aircraft insulation. After walking for 3 days, uphill to the peak of the mountain, they realized that there were no traces of civilization near them and only mountain ranges. They sent Antonio back to plane crash scene, as they had limited meat supply to divide among themselves. The days were the only time they could hike, and nights were below sub-zero temperature. The air was low on oxygen and miles of glaciers with rough terrain. Without any proper shelter, they had decided if any one of them perishes, the other had to continue the mission. After walking for 10 days, sometimes passing out to the point exhaustion, they finally saw a place with a river, green grasses, and a man on the other side of the river. They couldn't cross the river as they were weak. They slept the night near the river. The next day the man returned and saw them. He threw a stone wrapped around a paper with a pen towards them. They couldn't contain their happiness that they will finally survive against all odds. They walked around 44 miles to find help. They wrote that we are the survivors of the plane crash. We have no food and we can't walk anymore, and there are more survivors on the mountain. Then the man threw few pieces of bread towards them. They later said that the bread tasted heavenly and the guy was an angel sent by the God. The man went back to find help. On day 10 they both were rescued and were carried on the back of the horses. Nando felt that he got a new life and would live his life to the fullest. The rescue team was surprised by the path they took, as it was near impossible to walk those terrain. On day 71 and 72 all passengers were rescued. They were all weak, malnourished, but they all survived and one of them isn't alive today. The news of their survival spread across the globe, but after a few days of praising them, everyone started questioning about the ways they chose to survive without any food. It was impossible, and a photo taken by the rescuers captured an image of human body whose bones were stripped off flesh. Survivor accepted what they had done and they explained everything about their dire need of food for survival. Many people still call them cannibal savages. Nando even said in an interview that eating the flesh were their last resort and they did not enjoy any of it. So, tell me, what do you think about the event and what you would have done in the similar scenario? Write in the comments. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to this channel and be the first to watch such videos.